My name is Tim Janssen. I'm CEO and co-founder of Sofar Ocean. Joining me today is James Marshall, CEO and founder, I believe, of Berge Bulk. Welcome, James.
That's right. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. There are a couple of topics I would love to get your perspective on. Like many industries in the world, maritime shipping is undergoing a rapid transition to basically, change from being a pretty big contributor to greenhouse gases to getting to net zero in 2050. This requires many investments. It requires adoption of new technologies and the development of those technologies, and generally changing the way we work. So that's both, I think, a number of challenges and opportunities at the same time.
That's right. Yeah.
I know this is top of mind for you. You've spoken about this a lot. You've published about it a lot, and more importantly, you've done a lot. I think it's fair to say that within the industry, Berge Bulk, under your leadership, has been leading the way in terms of adopting new technologies and supporting the way to actually accelerate towards decarbonization. So one of the questions I have, and I would love to hear this from you, what is your plan specifically for Berge Bulk to basically continue to lead and execute on this transition?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Tim. And yeah, look, it's right. I think we've had a very clear vision since I started the company 16 years ago that we have a big environmental footprint, and we're very passionate about trying to reduce that. We talk about a four-pronged strategy of attack, and I use the sort of war metaphor because I do think we are on a war against climate change, and this is all hands on deck moment. Again, another metaphor, but we have four sort of pillars to our plan, and we run them simultaneously. So the first has been to build a better, more efficient fleet, and there's been a lot of changes. We built bigger, better, as I said, more fuel efficient ships, and actually, if we compare our ships with 2008 to when we started to where we are today, actually the fleet is roughly 45% more efficient than if we had started or if we had kept the same fleet in 2008. So there is a very big impact in the first part. The second part is to then use even more technology, more fuel saving devices to make the existing fleet more efficient. And that's a real whole range of gamut of technology, and we're continuing to try those. One of them is better route optimization, better weather optimization, where obviously you guys are very critical, but we also have tried many different technologies. We have, for example, bubbles underneath, trying to lower the friction of some ships. We've recently installed very large wind wings on our ships, so using wind-assisted technology, but also better paint, better heat recovery systems in the engine room, and we continually invest and try new technologies the whole time. The third policy or third prong has been to look at new fuels. Our vision is still to have a zero emission or zero carbon emission ship by 2030, and actually we want our whole fleet to be zero emissions by 2050. So we recently committed to build 2 ammonia powered ships, which will deliver before 2030, which is very exciting. But also looking at biofuels, for example, drop-in fuel, so kind of alternative fuels. And then the fourth part is to really look at carbon and the carbon that we are already producing. And we know that we're not going to get to zero with our existing legacy fleet. We have a carbon emission. So actually our policy is to really offset our emissions by 2025. So we are really taking a leading position in that. We have two pillars to do that, or two tools to do that. One is to use sort of try to capture carbon on board, and we're starting to try carbon capture systems on board the ships. But the balance we will need to offset on land or somewhere else. So we've also been investing and buying carbon offsets, through the whole range, from direct air carbon capture all the way down to nature-based solutions. So a real whole range. Again, coming back to my metaphors, I call it the Marshall plan, or
Yeah.
the Maritime Marshall Plan, and it's a huge investment. It is sort of reminiscent of a huge investment that we had back after the Second World War to really to invest in a new change and a new climate initiative. So we're really trying to push that agenda. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, on the last metaphor, in many ways, it's sort of like what the original Marshall Plan sort of did was also solving for a chicken and egg problem, right? And I'd love to hear how you think about that in the maritime industry. If there isn't a market, there's nobody going to build the product for it. So, I mean, I think this is also what maritime is facing right now, is that, for instance, in the future where ammonia would be widely used, it means that somebody needs to produce that ammonia, which means that somebody needs to buy that for somebody to invest in building factories to build it. So how do we break through the difficulty of making investments, not only for ammonia but more broadly? How do we get sales to scale so that they can be made more economically and that the ROI is sufficient to actually earn it back in limited amounts of time? Today, we probably can't, right? So it requires leadership to say, well, we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to find a way to pay for it. But how does that sort of that transition, which is always the hardest part, to start the engine essentially, how do you see that sort of happening, and what's needed to be successful there?
Yeah, I look at it, it's a very good question. And our orders that we've just placed for these ammonia fuel ship, actually the engine is not fully ready yet.
Yeah.
We're not actually sure where the ammonia will come from, and we don't actually yet have a customer who's ready to pay for the green ammonia.
Yeah.
But the industry is moving fast, as you indicated, and so there are people like me who are trying to do it and try to preempt and lead by example. But I think really for mass adoption, we're going to have legislative support. We're very happy to see, for example, a carbon tax where carbon is taxed, across the board. I mean, I just asked for a level playing field where we're all taxed, and ultimately we can pass that cost on to the end user.
Yep.
We're starting to see some legislative areas, for example, the EU, starting to introduce taxes for carbon emissions and stuff. So it is happening. The IMO is taking a pretty active response on it, and I think we'll see changes, but we obviously need to go faster, and we need to act now.
Yeah.
And so I think shipping has been a slow to change industry, but talking to many owners, we're all recognizing the problem, recognizing our footprint, and really trying to move forward as rapidly as we can, and starting to lead by example.
And so, broadly speaking, obviously there's legislation that can help drive development and investments. What about sort of industries other than maritime that need to support it, right? I mean, we are maybe an example, on the technology side. But again, going back to say ammonia or the development of new engines, new propulsion technologies, how do these other industries find an opportunity to actually step in and say look, we're in, we can do this technology-wise? I think there's a lot of a lot of things are possible.
Yeah.
But how do we remove the barrier of who's going to pay for it? It's still too expensive. The ROI is not there. Is there a way for industry and the maritime industry to work together more effectively? Are there barriers today that we might be able to resolve in ways that maybe you've thought about?
Yeah, look, I think again a very big question, and ultimately, someone needs to pay for the transition.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that that's the customer, and I think many customers are prepared to pay for it.
Yeah.
I may be quite idealistic on that, but when you look at the cost per ton that we carry, actually the cost of a green transport or a zero carbon voyage, is not prohibitive. We just need to be able to pass it on to somebody.
Yep.
And there's a lot of inertia around that. There's a lot of the chicken and egg, as you said. It needs encouragement from governments and also the consumer to start demanding it. And I think we're seeing that a bit in consumer goods. Some of the container lines find it easier to pass on their costs, to somebody who wants green freight. We haven't yet seen it so much in in my main business, which is in iron ore or bulk commodities.
Yep.
But I think we're starting to see people talking about it, and ultimately, if you're going to buy an electric car, for example, you might as well have the iron ore being shipped in a green way. Ultimately you want green steel as well. So, and you want it mined in a green way. So, I think we need customers to step up as well and ask for it. But yeah, it's a big ecosystem, a big challenge.
Yeah. And so specifically maybe around sort of like the environmental factors. I mean, this is obviously we at Sofar are really focused on. In the future, and I think this is a reality regardless of which technology we actually adopt at scale, we're going to be running alternative fuels that are going to be lower or zero carbon. We're going to probably look for alternative propulsion technologies or augmented propulsion to reduce basically the need for using more expensive but better fuels. What do you see as sort of like the value of voyage optimization and understanding weather better to be able to optimize against it? Like, where do you see that fit into this grand picture of decarbonization for the industry?
Well, I think you hit it right in that ultimately fuel will cost more in the future, especially if it's zero carbon fuels. The cost of green ammonia or green methanol is hugely expensive. So having an efficient ship is going to be critical in the future. But I would say it's pretty critical today. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been really focused on this since I started the business. And remember, even if we switch to new fuel ships, there's also a legacy fleet who is going to be paying more for their fuel. And we want to reduce our footprint across the way. So, weather optimization, we've, I would say, been rather obsessed with it since day one. And obviously what we love about you guys is that it's getting more and more sophisticated, better and better. And I think we'll only have a more important part as we go along, especially as fuel prices go up, and especially for new fuels. But wouldn't dismiss the existing legacy fleet. It's going to be around for a long time.
Absolutely.
And there are only a certain amount of levers that we can make our existing fleet more efficient. I mentioned a few of them. We can retrofit, we can use better paints, but weather optimization is a huge part of that, and routing our ships in a really effective way is a really cost saving and fuel saving part of it.
So one of the hurdles for investing, and sort of like this is my outsider's perspective, but I think it applies to any industry, is not understanding what it costs and what the benefits are of making that investment, right? So for instance, if you were to put a mass flow meter on a ship, but you don't do anything with the data, you're probably not earning that money back ever. But if you were to use that data to optimize the controls of the vessel, like how are you running the vessel, you could earn that back quickly. But understanding the ROI of like different paints, sails, like big capex investments on ships to make them more efficient, I think that is a critical stepping stone. So the way we sometimes think about optimization, which really inherently includes the understanding of the performance of the ship, because otherwise you can't really optimize it. It could be a stepping stone, sort of like technology, the thing that might enable other technologies to be adopted quicker and more broadly, because the ROI can actually be captured and validated. Do you see that as an important component of like driving investments forward? Like, how much of it is an uncertainty about understanding the ROI versus maybe other questions that owners and operators might have in terms of like, should I invest this in my vessel? In other words, what can sort of like better understanding the performance of the vessel contribute to adopting or investing in new technologies sooner?
Yeah, look, I think we're all want to know what new technology is going to deliver and what the ROI will be. Some are sort of, I would say, no-brainers are easier to put on, and obviously some are further down the path and will take a much longer payback. But it's true, data is a very critical part of that, and how you use that data is is very critical. And I think there will be many examples of flow meters or torque meters which have been installed are quite fun bits of kit for a while, but then the data is not used in the most efficient way or in the most effective way. So again, I think it's important that we make it very transparent. We can actually use the data to influence, in the case of route optimization, actually to influence the path of the ship.
Yeah.
The contact with the master is very important as well. So he's very involved and able to to optimize the route.
Yeah.
There's certain obviously new technologies coming along. Wind is a great example of one where where the weather routing is is even more
Obvious.
important.
Yeah.
And as you said, more obvious. And it's important where we have economic returns. It's great to get a good wind, but if it's a long distance to get the good wind, obviously that is not the most optimized route. So it's a very dynamic process, but using the data to prove the ROI, I think is really critical.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point, because that's going to be a difficult trade-off, and I think that's a trade-off that optimization is uniquely set up to do. Is like you're investing into like an additional thrust, for instance with wind.
Yeah.
Like how much of that can you capture in the most economic way?
Yeah.
Like you could maximize the benefits of sail by driving to the Southern Ocean, catch a lot of wind on the beam, but you'd be at sea twice as long, and probably spend a lot more fuel and time in that way. So,
and obviously the market is obviously changing a lot. So some ships may be earning more 1 month, and it can take more account of the wind, but sometimes we need to go much faster. So.
Exactly, and I think that is the sort of like when we add complexity, dual fuels, alternative propulsion. To my mind, this is where optimization can really help. It's already hard. I would argue that it's probably impossible for a human on the back of the envelope to figure out what strategy to take today with just a combustion engine and weather resistance to like figure out what the best strategy is. But if you start adding sails and potential different types of fuels, then that certainly is impossible. And I think that's where optimization can help, maximizing the benefits from a pure earnings perspective on the ship.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Right, and then capture what the benefits specifically to whatever part of the ship were, like for instance the sails or the improved paint or.
And bear in mind, when we typically install some new technology, we're going into dry dock and we're probably replacing the paint. We're probably putting other different technologies on board. So there's probably 5 different
multiple things,
things going on. So to try and work out what contribution from each different technology is, it's a complicated process and not easy.
No, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today in San Francisco and sharing your perspective. I certainly learned a lot, and thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah, well, thanks, Tim. It's a fantastic office here, and great to be here.